The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Higgins.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. Today is Testimony Tuesday, where we bring you real, live, firsthand testimonial accounts of the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. Pre-recording this a few days early in advance of Tuesday, but we are very blessed to have a special guest with us today. It is Dr. Robert George. He is the 6th McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University, a program that was founded under his leadership in 2000. He's also frequently been a visiting professor at Harvard Law School. He also holds JD and MTS degrees from Harvard University, as well as 4 degrees from Oxford University, and on top of that, 22 honorary doctorates. He's the author of hundreds of books, essays, and articles, including the books Mind, Heart, and Soul, Intellectuals, and the Path to Rome, Conscience and Its Enemies, Confronting the Dogmas of Liberal Secularism, and Embryo, A Defense of Human Life. Dr. George co-authored an amicus brief to the Supreme Court with John Finnis during the Dobbs case that made the legal historical case that unborn children are constitutional persons entitled to equal protection under the laws, as stated in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. We hope to get into that subject a bit as we hear more about Dr. George's good work later in the show. And last but not least, he's a finger-style guitarist and bluegrass banjo player. You can learn much more and have the resources of all of his works by going to his website, robertpgeorge.com. But we're very blessed, again, to have him here with us today. Dr. Robert George, thank you for being with us. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jim. Thanks very much. It's an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, honor to have you. And so we always begin at the beginning. Let's start with childhood. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Well, I was born and brought up in the hills of West Virginia. That's where that bluegrass banjo playing comes from. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners. My father was spared mining work by World War II. He was drafted at age 18, still in high school, hadn't even finished. The school sent his parents a diploma. He didn't get to attend his graduation. He was off in Normandy and Brittany fighting. That was in 1944. And when he came back, he had some skills and opportunities, not the opportunity to go to college, but he didn't have to go into the coal mines. And as a result, I didn't end up in the coal mines. I am the oldest of 5, all boys. My mom and dad, neither of whom had been to college, brought us up with the understanding that education was important. It was a way to lift oneself up in the world, have a profession, better income, higher social standing, a better way of life. So we all were brought up on the assumption that we would go to college. And I was number 1. I was the oldest, so I was the first to go off and first in my family to go to college. I went off to a small, very intellectually intense liberal arts college, Swarthmore College near Philadelphia. It was a rocky first year because I wasn't very well prepared by my previous education for the rigors of a serious liberal arts education. But with the help of a couple of professors who really specially reached out to me and brought me along, they saw that I was struggling. I was able to catch up and get up to speed, and pretty soon things took off from there. The pivotal intellectual and in some way spiritual event in my life was encountering Plato's dialogue Gorgias as a sophomore in college. And that dialogue was the one that got me interested in understanding the deep issues in life in a serious way. I'd been brought up in the church as a Catholic. My father is Syrian from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. My mother is Italian and Catholic. I was brought up in the church right there in the wake of Vatican II. And I was certainly a believer and tried to be devout. But I didn't really understand the depth of the issues that religion as a response and answer to, and the Christian faith as a response and answer to, until I started getting into philosophy, introduced by Plato's dialogue, Gorgias. And that was really a life-transforming experience. It put me on the path to the work that I would end up doing professionally and vocationally, work in philosophy of law, moral and political philosophy, bioethics, all the things that I do. It also was an experience that got me thinking seriously about what the point of education was. I had entered college, as I say, with essentially an instrumentalist view of education. I saw the point and purpose of education, social mobility, professional success, rising up in the world, having more money. What Plato taught me was that while all of those things are perfectly legitimate concerns and ambitions, the real and most fundamental purpose of seeking knowledge is the intrinsic value of truth. That we should desire knowledge, we should desire truth, not simply as means to other ends, getting ahead, building bridges, getting things done, but for its own sake, for the inherent enrichments of knowledge of truth. Above all, the truth about the most important things, the truth about the great questions of meaning and value, the great religious and existential questions. So as I say, it was really a life-transforming experience and put me on the path to all the work that I do as a teacher and as a scholar.
Mm-hmm. Wow, fascinating. And so at the same time, there would be certainly a rise in moral relativism in the culture. What was your sense of that as you were coming to learn about the fact that there was this need to pursue the truth? There was a truth worth pursuing and a good worth willing, and there was an intellectual formation that was needed to really move forward in doing good in this way. At the same time, there were these assaults trying to say, hey, there's really nothing that's true. It's all relativism. What was your awareness of all of that, and where was your, I guess, stand in that fight?
Very aware of all that. I mean, being educated in the crucible of the late 1960s and early 1970s, when moral subjectivism, moral relativism, moral skepticism was all the rage, both in an informal sense, it's what people believed, but also formally, it was quite dominant, at least in some branches of philosophy and in the academic world. And I thought that it was my responsibility, even though the relativistic view was not plausible to me from the beginning. I regarded it as my responsibility as someone who was trying to be a serious philosopher, to consider fairly the arguments pro and con for the various forms of relativism and schools of relativism that presented themselves as academic theories. But I never bought it. None of them seemed at all plausible to me. The arguments did not hold up. Very often they were self-defeating. They were self-refuting. If you, to take the simplest example, if you assert that there is no such thing as truth, well, then what's the status of your own assertion? Are you asserting it as true, or are you just making sounds with your mouth and vocal cords? Obviously, it's a self-defeating proposition to say there is no such thing as truth because you're asserting it as true. There are more sophisticated arguments for more relative subjectivism and skepticism, but I found on reflection that none of them held up really in the end any better. So I became, from really my student days, a pretty sharp, intense critic of all forms of moral relativism. And so then the question became, well, if there is in fact a truth, if there's an objective, knowable truth, well, then what is it? And how do we go about the business of finding it? And here's where the influence of the great thinkers of antiquity, not only Plato, but Aristotle, Cicero, other great thinkers from the Greek and Roman traditions, and then the great medieval thinkers, above all St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Christian philosopher and theologian of the High Middle Ages. This is where their influence on me really became pronounced, because I found in that work the resources for a compelling critique of modern ideologies such as moral relativism and skepticism, that struck me on reflection as just not cutting it. Something was wrong. So I really, in a sense, reached back to find the resources for the critique of contemporary thought. Now, you can't just look up the answers in Plato and Aristotle, and more needs to be said than was said by those great thinkers and the great thinkers of the Middle Ages, like Aquinas. So, once I became a professional philosopher, once I entered the field after law school and graduate school, I tried to make my own contribution to that body of literature, to that body of thought, to that great tradition fed by both Athens and Jerusalem that would enable us to even more powerfully critique the misguided ideologies of our age. Not simply skepticism, but utilitarianism, Marxism, various forms of secular liberalism, some of which were extremely dominant in my student days. So that's my background there, Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, phenomenal. Yeah, we're going to get back with Dr. Robert George in just a moment, but where we're going to go next, I think I'd love to ask Dr. George about how old he was when Roe v. Wade came down, and what his sense of things was like at that time, and sort of how things have progressed. He's been in this fight. I mean, he wrote just a phenomenal work. So much of his good work is just it's to be discovered if you haven't discovered it yet. I've still got a lot more to discover for myself, but his book on embryo, where he really lays out the scientific facts of things, is one that needs to be read and far and wide to everybody to make sure that we understand. It is a scientific fact, not a religious belief, that life begins at fertilization. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Prayer of Deliverance. Almighty God and Father, we beg Thee, through the intercession and help of the archangels, Saint Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel, for the deliverance of our brothers and sisters who are enslaved by the evil one, from anxiety, sadness, and obsessions.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From hatred, fornication, and envy.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From thoughts of jealousy, rage, and death.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every thought of suicide and abortion.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every form of sinful sexuality.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every division in our family and every harmful friendship.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
From every sort of spell, malefice, witchcraft, and every form of the occult.
We implore Thee, deliver us, O Lord.
Thou who said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you," grant that through the intercession of the Virgin Mary, we may be liberated from every demonic influence and enjoy Thy peace always. In the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
I might have gone to church, at Christmas time, gradually quit going. It's not as scary as I thought it was. It's a much more warm and open place, and God really is about love. It's not about the rules and the things that I remember as a young child. It really is about the love that God has for each one of us that's so deep and wonderful.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for any reason, visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
Podcasts of our network-produced shows are free for your listening pleasure at thestationofthecross.com and on our free iCatholic Radio app for Android and Apple mobile devices. Be uplifted in your faith and inspired to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. Listen today at thestationofthecross.com or on our iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today on this Testimony Tuesday, Dr. Robert George, robertpgeorge.com. Dr. George, 1973, Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton comes about. How old were you? What was your sense of things, your reaction, your response at the time?
I believe I was 17 years old. I was in high school. A few years earlier, my mother had recruited me into the pro-life movement. My mother was herself a pro-life activist in West Virginia. She started taking me to meetings of the local Right to Life chapter, which was overwhelmingly women. There were two male graduate students in philosophy who were part of the group, and then there was a Catholic priest, and then me, since my mother brought me along as a high school student, and then about 20 or 25 women. Some, like my mother, who were stay-at-home moms, others who were professional women, including one woman who was professor at West Virginia University, who went on to be a national leader of the pro-life movement, Dr. Wanda Franz. So that experience sort of formed me in my pro-life convictions. So I can remember exactly where I was on January 22nd, 1973, when Roe against Wade was handed down. Having already been recruited into the movement, I was working a pro-life table at the West Virginia University Student Center called the Mountain Lair. I had classes in the morning, but for some reason didn't have classes in the afternoon. It was a Monday. So I went down. I had my driver's license by then. I drove down to the Mountain Lair and joined the ladies there at the table, handing out literature to students and others who would walk by. And as we were there working the table that afternoon, a student walked by us and saw what our issue was, and he said, "Hey, there's been a big Supreme Court decision today on your issue." And we said, "Well, what was it? What was the ruling? What happened?" And he said, "I don't know. I just heard on the radio there was a big decision handed down." So we rushed to find a radio, and then we had to wait for news on the hour. Of course, there was no internet in those days. You couldn't just get online and see what was happening. We didn't have any 24-hour news cycle or cable news or anything like that. So we waited for the hour, and then on the hour we got the bad news that the Supreme Court of the United States had handed down a ruling eliminating all legal protection for unborn children. Now, the initial reports were incorrect. The news was even worse than what was reported. The initial reports were that the Supreme Court had forbidden states from protecting unborn children during the first trimester of pregnancy, but allowed states to protect unborn children later in gestation. That turned out to be false. So when the full news came out, basically the Supreme Court had forbidden states from protecting unborn babies for the first two trimesters of pregnancy, for 2/3 of gestation. And allowed, with significant limitations, prohibitions on abortion only in the third trimester when the child was viable, in the sense that with the technology of the day, the child could survive outside the womb if delivered. So we were absolutely flabbergasted and shocked and appalled that the Supreme Court of the United States, whose job is to protect equally the rights and dignity of all, would hand down a decision essentially reading an entire class of human beings, unborn babies, out of the community of the commonly protected, treating them as non-persons, as objects, as things, as entities that can be destroyed at the will of other human beings. And I'll tell you, we at that table, like pro-life people all over the country on that Monday, January 22nd, 1973, we vowed, this will not stand. We will not permit this to stand. We will do whatever it takes. We will work for as long as we have to work. We will pray. We will struggle. We will educate. We will sacrifice to get this abominable decision overturned and to restore protection for the life of the precious, innocent, vulnerable child in the womb. That was the pledge that, as far as I can tell, every pro-life American, everyone who was active in the pro-life movement, certainly our little group, that was the pledge that we made that day. And it took us 49 years, 5 months, and 2 days to achieve our goal of overturning Roe against Wade. But we did it. We did it against all odds. The money, the power, the influence were all on the other side. We were ridiculed. We were defamed. The pro-life movement was subjected to all sorts of vitriol, libel, and slander. And yet we stood fast and we achieved that goal. But we need to remember that goal was only an approximate goal. It's not the ultimate goal. Because all we were able to do by overturning Roe against Wade was to restore to the legislative branch of government the authority to protect unborn babies. The Supreme Court decision does not itself protect unborn babies. And so under that decision, at least as things currently stand, if states like New York, Illinois, California, Colorado choose to expose unborn babies to the lethal violence of abortion, all the way up through the end of pregnancy to birth, if they choose to do that, they can. They are allowed under the Dobbs ruling, that is the ruling overturning Roe against Wade. They are allowed to do that, and those states have done that. So we have not succeeded or come anywhere near succeeding in our ultimate goal to make sure that every child is welcomed in life and protected by law, to restore the equal protection of the laws extended to our unborn brothers and sisters. So we still have a long way to go, but we'll make the same pledge we made on Monday, January 22nd, 1973. We will do whatever it takes. We will work for as long as it takes. We will struggle. We will pray. We will sacrifice until we achieve that goal of equal protection for all.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, a long way to go. And yet you have given us, I believe, the really the seeds, the strategy forward, which is constitutional personhood of the preborn, of the unborn, and this amicus brief that you authored with John Finnis. Tell us the story behind this. To me, this is just so incredible, so helpful. Reading through this, reading this legal historical argument. One of the points that in reading through this early on, I write in the margins is that if you are just an average person on the street back then, you make this argument in here. Go back in time and talk to someone. And this would be common sense at the time of the 14th Amendment, that any person includes unborn human beings. And so we're kind of looking at it quite anachronistically in terms of saying, well, you can have you can have human beings, sure, but not every human being is a human person. We would say, no, every human being is in fact a human person. And this is a sort of a language game. I say it's similar to what we're seeing with the transgenderism, where they're taking another sort of philosophical concept and trying to layer it on top of a truth that we know in order to confuse people in terms of saying, okay, yeah, you have a biological sex, but then what about your gender? So you can have one biological sex, but your gender can be different. And therefore, we can play games here, and transgenderism is the result. Same thing here with you can have a human being, but okay, well, what about a biological human being? But then maybe a human being that isn't a human person. And so therefore, we can treat them differently. We can do things that we wouldn't do to every human person because they're not quite a human person. They're just a human. I mean, these are horrible, disastrous sorts of ideas that when you play them out, they lead to the dehumanization of people in a way that is just frightful, and that we've seen throughout history play out. And so here we are, and you have laid out this argument with John Finnis. We talk about it all the time here on The Simple Truth, especially the Friday show with Father Imbarado and what we're doing with the National Men's March and the Personhood Rally and all of this. To us, this is the playbook. This is what people need to hear, and we need to bring it down into simple language, get a grassroots movement around it, and let's go. We believe that's what the pro-life movement needs to be focused on first and foremost, and that there's an urgency to this with the current makeup of the court that perhaps because they have not seen a certain groundswell in the public sentiment, perhaps that's affected the court in their prudence or their ability, their sense of taking this up and actually ruling on it. I don't know. I think they should have ruled on it just based on the argument that you and John Finnis put forth here. But anyway, share a bit of the story, and some of your thoughts on all of this.
Sure. The foundational principle of all morality is the principle of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family. All the great traditions of thought and faith in some way or another affirm or push in the direction of that principle. In the biblical tradition, in the Jewish and Christian faiths, we see it articulated in the very first chapter of the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, where we're taught that human beings, unlike brute animals, unlike anything else on the globe, though fashioned from the mere dust of the earth, are nevertheless made in the very image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of all that is, in the very image and likeness of God. Now, we know that being made in the image and likeness of God doesn't mean that God has 5 fingers on each of 2 hands and hair on his head and a nose. God is a spirit. God is immaterial, except in the sense that God becomes man in the person of Jesus Christ. So it can't be that. It can't be in respect of our material existence that we're godlike. So what is it? It has to be in virtue of our possession of and eventual ability to exercise, by fulfilling our nature, the capacities for deliberation, judgment, and choice. It's the powers of reason and freedom, the powers of agency that are at the ground of our dignity. And those powers we possess in radical form, that is root form, from the very beginning of our existence. Our nature is a rational nature in view of, in light of, in respect of, in virtue of our possession, at least in root form, from the earliest moment of our existence, from the earliest embryonic stage, and through ultimately to our death, those capacities for reason and freedom. So it's in virtue of our rational nature that we are possessors of that dignity. And that is, of course, possessed by all and all equally, not just the smartest, not just the strongest, not just the wealthiest, not just the prettiest, not just the handsomest, not just those with the highest status in a society, but everybody. And so that's the principle for which we need to stand. And I can take you from there, and we'll do in a moment. I see we have a break coming up, but I can take you from there to the amicus brief and to the argument that Professor Finnis and I made for the Supreme Court.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, looking forward to it. Dr. Robert George is with us. And look, these are simple truths that everybody ought to be united around, as our friend Hadley Arcus calls them, anchoring truths, right? These truths of natural law. The fact is, it's a scientific fact that life begins at conception, fertilization, right? And we all ought to share the view that it is wrong to be killing innocent human beings. This is wrong. We all ought to stand against this. And so we have to notice this, that in this time that we're living, we've got thousands of human beings, our littlest brothers and sisters, being killed every single day. We've got a responsibility. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live. Mother Miriam is a Catholic nun on a mission to bring Jesus and a message of hope to a world that has lost its way.
Hello, beloved. This is Mother Miriam, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Mother Miriam Live. As always, you're going to be able to call, text, or email whatever your questions are. Through a partnership between the Station of the Cross and LifeSite News, you will be able to listen and watch Mother Miriam Live on YouTube and Facebook at the Station of the Cross, including past episodes on podcast. God bless you.
Listen on your local Station of the Cross affiliate and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app, or watch the Mother Miriam Live video stream on Facebook and YouTube by searching the Station of the Cross. That's Mother Miriam Live each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
Do you love listening to the Station of the Cross on your car radio, but sometimes find yourself driving outside the listening area? Never miss another minute of your favorite show. Download the iCatholic Radio app so you can listen anywhere in the world 24 hours a day. The iCatholic Radio app is available for your phone in the Apple Store or for your Android phone in Google Play. Visit thestationofthecross.com for more information.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. Robert George, robertpgeorge.com for all of his good works and to learn much more about him there. Talking a bit about the amicus brief leading into this, the amicus brief that you co-wrote with John Finnis for the Dobbs case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And by the way, as I was looking through the many works that you have there on your website, noticing the book that you edited on the philosophy of John Finnis. I wish I had, I could just pause time and just sit for days and weeks and months and just go through and read all of your works and just and kind of have fun with all of that, or if I could just kind of zap it all into my brain. But you've done some incredible work here, and again, thank you so much for being with us and sharing a bit more, shedding some light on these things. And yes, please continue on with leading into the amicus brief.
Sure. An amicus curiae brief is a brief submitted by someone or some group of persons who are not parties to a case, but they have something to say. They have an interest in the case. They want to make an argument to the court. Amicus curiae literally means friend of the court. So I submitted a friend of the court brief in the Dobbs case, and the brief I submitted together with my mentor and dear friend, Professor John Finnis. John Finnis is one of the most eminent philosophers and legal scholars in the world. He has a chair at Oxford University where he's professor of law and legal philosophy, now emeritus. He also taught for many years while holding his Oxford appointment at the University of Notre Dame in the United States in the law school there. He is as eminent a figure in academia as there can be. As it happens, just I'll mention as a side point, he happens to be an adult convert to the Catholic faith as well. He came from a secular belief to faith when he was a young scholar. So I had the enormous privilege and honor of being one of Professor Finnis's graduate students when I did my doctorate, my first doctorate at Oxford. And I learned an enormous amount from him. And he and I then continued to work together on many issues, some purely of academic philosophical interest, others more practically oriented with respect to advancing our belief in marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife, and of course the pro-life cause. So we have been urging in our writings the overturning of Roe against Wade, and when the Dobbs decision put that issue squarely on the Dobbs, I said the Dobbs decision, I meant the Dobbs case, the litigation, put the question fairly on the table, squarely on the table for the Supreme Court. Professor Finnis and I decided that we would together submit an amicus curiae brief. Now, a majority of justices on the Supreme Court today, this has not historically been the case, but today a majority of justices on the Supreme Court take the view that the correct way to interpret the Constitution is by reference to it, the original public meaning of its provisions. So in crafting our argument as lawyers, and Professor Finnis and I are both lawyers as well as philosophers, in crafting our argument, we looked at the original public meaning of the words of the 14th Amendment, the amendment to the Constitution that was ratified, one of the three amendments proposed and ratified shortly after the Civil War in the late 1860s, really to deal with first with the reality of slavery, to abolish it in the 13th Amendment, and then to deal with the discrimination that the Republicans who proposed these amendments rightly foresaw coming in the wake of the abolition of slavery, to try to protect Black people, the former slaves, the descendants of the former slaves, from the discrimination that would certainly be coming their way in the wake of the abolition of slavery. But quite deliberately, the framers of the amendment and its ratifiers used language that was general, not specific to the question of race or to any particular race. The language was the language of personhood. And so, for example, the provision, the 14th Amendment says that no state shall deny any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny any person the equal protection of the laws. So Professor Finnis and I looked at those words. What does person mean? What was the original public meaning, public understanding of the word person? What does equal mean? What does equal protection mean? And when we examined the historical sources, we found that for the framers and ratifiers of the amendment in 1868, the word person meant any living member of the species Homo sapiens, any living human being. They rejected the idea, they did not adopt the idea that there could be some human beings who are not persons, human non-persons. That idea was foreign and alien to them. To qualify as a person whose rights therefore had to be equally protected by the states, all one needed to be was a member of the human family, a human being, a member of the species Homo sapiens. We were able to support this with overwhelming historical evidence from medical treatises, from scientific work at the time, from legal treatises, from court precedents. The testimony of the sources is absolutely unanimous. That the unborn are considered not only to be human beings, but to be persons in virtue of being human beings. All of this is true, and the evidence really reflects the developments in human embryology, the understanding of human embryology, and more generally mammalian embryology, that began in the 1820s. It was in that period when modern human embryology was born, and we moved from speculation and myth and guessing to an actual scientific understanding of how the lives of human beings and of other mammals begins. It was really the discovery of the mammalian ovum by the biologist and embryologist Carl von Baer in 1826, 1827 that transformed our understanding of human development and human developmental biology that enabled us to enter into a real scientific understanding and out of just speculation when it came to how human life begins and develops. And by the 1860s, it's widely known to all educated people and to the public more generally that the development of a human life is continuous from the earliest embryonic stage all the way through to birth and into infancy and into adolescence and ultimately to adulthood. So we know that each and every human being begins from the zygote stage and develops by a gapless process from that earliest embryonic stage into and through the later embryonic stages, the fetal stage of development, the infant stage, the child stage, the adolescent stage, and into adulthood with his or her, and I say his or her because sex is determined from the beginning in human beings, with his or her unity and determinateness and identity fully intact. You, Jim, what are you, maybe 39-year-old Jim Havens, you are the same human being who was 21-year-old college student, and before that a 15-year-old high school student, and before that a 9-year-old, and before that a precocious 5-year-old, and before that a toddler, and before that a newborn infant, and before that a 7-month fetus, and before that a 5-day embryo. You developed, again, through a gapless process from that early embryonic stage all the way into adulthood. Same person. You did not get transformed from a non-human to a human, or from a non-person to a person somewhere in the course of that development. No, you were from the beginning exactly what you are. You were just in an earlier developmental stage. An embryo and a child are not two different things. They're the same thing, the very same individual in different developmental stages, just as the infant and the adolescent are not two different things. Those labels aren't names of different entities. They're names of the same entity at different developmental stages. So we made the argument to the court, and the evidence, honestly, the evidence we was an avalanche of evidence, and it was absolutely overwhelming. We urged the court, in view of the evidence, to declare that states had an obligation to confer upon the unborn the equal protection of the laws. The court in the decision did not go as far as we wanted the court to go. It went so far as to overturn Roe versus Wade, to restore to the legislature, to the states, and I would argue to the national legislature, although they didn't go into the issue of federalism there. But anyway, it returned to the legislature the authority to decide to protect unborn children if they wanted to, but didn't require the protection of unborn children. I'd like to see the court go the additional step, or even better, I'd like to see the Congress legislatively take the additional step of establishing at the national level the equal protection of the laws for each and every member of the human family, irrespective, to be sure, of race or sex or ethnicity, but equally irrespective of age or size or stage of development or condition of dependency, born or unborn.
Yes. Yeah. And as we talked with Hadley Arcus about this, he was making the point as well that, other folks can act on this as well within the government institutions. Governors could make moves. Certainly the executive branch, president could do some things. And so there are various things that can be done here to enforce what's already there in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, saying these are persons. We can't be killing them every day as we're doing by the thousands. This government sanctioned, oftentimes government funded, government protected, mass killing of these children in the womb, and exploitation of the pregnant mom in need that we should be helping, not lying to, deceiving, telling her that this is somehow not a person, not a human being, and no problem. This can be a good thing for you. No way. There's nothing good about this. And so, what can we do to get the Supreme Court? If somebody else acts on it, that can potentially help to bubble it up to the Supreme Court, where they'd be forced to make a ruling on it. It seems to be that it is their job as the arbiters of the Constitution, when it is explicitly stating this in the 14th Amendment. They need to answer the question: what is the child in the womb? Is it a person or is it not? And if it's not a person, then what else could it possibly be? Of course it's a person, and it does fall under those protections. You guys have laid out this case, and we've got you, we've got John Finnis, we've got Hadley Arcus, we've got Josh Craddock, we've got all of the legal historical argument here. It doesn't seem, though, that regular folks seem to be understanding this. It doesn't seem like the pro-life movement seems to be picking this up and really running with this with full force, where it seems to me this ought to be a no-brainer. We've got the truth. We've got the evidence on this. Why aren't we all shouting it from the rooftops and urging the Supreme Court, even demanding the Supreme Court to do their job and to act on this?
These things do take time. There was that whole 49 years, 5 months, and 2 days. We wish it could have happened sooner and quicker, swifter. It should have. But it's hard. Just causes don't prevail overnight. That's never been true. It wasn't true in the struggle for racial justice. That did not happen overnight. That was centuries. The struggle to protect women and children from poor working conditions and exploitation. That was a struggle that took a long time. The struggle to achieve equal status for women, for voting for women, for example, it took a long time. There are all sorts of impediments, and people fall for bad ideologies and get locked into beliefs that are not actually rationally justifiable, but nevertheless seem so sound to them. We can end up being zealots for bad causes. So I don't want to, it's frustrating, I agree, but you don't want to be too frustrated with this. We do need to look at the historical record for we human creatures, we frail, fallen, fallible human creatures going through this vale of tears. But we need to be determined, Jim, and we need to do our best. We need to reach out to our sisters and in particular with compassion and care. We need to stop lying about this, stop lying to them about this. We need to eschew the idea of quick solutions to problems, whether they're individual problems or social problems, especially lethal solutions to those problems, and do the hard work that's needed to bring care and comfort and compassion to mother and child alike, to everyone who's in need.
Yes, man, important point. We've got to persevere. We know that there is adversity day in and day out, and continue. This is where our faith is so helpful, to pick up that cross each day, to come follow Jesus, and to really persevere in that authentic love we're called to. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned.
If the cares and anxieties of life are weighing you down, come to the St. Thomas More House of Prayer and allow the Lord to refresh your soul. The St. Thomas More House of Prayer is a Catholic retreat center devoted to praying and promoting the Liturgy of the Hours. You'll find a tranquil atmosphere that's ideal for deep prayer, whether as an individual or for a group retreat. We're located at 365 Hill City Road in Cranberry, Pennsylvania. Make your reservation today or learn more at liturgyofthehours.org. You can also call us at 814-676-1910. That's 814-676-1910. We would love to help you experience the Liturgy of the Hours and discover the prayer that will change your life.
The iCatholic Radio mobile app is 2 apps in 1. Your place to hear great Catholic programs and music. Here's what listeners are saying about the updated iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Through the iCatholic Radio app, I have listened to the sermons and teachings several times. The effect has been a deeper understanding of my faith and Catholic tradition. This app has truly been a blessing in my life and has increased my faith.
With the new app, you can choose to listen to our programs like Mother Miriam Live or The Catholic Current whenever you like. But you can also switch over to the best in contemporary music by Catholic artists. We even bring you hours of Gregorian chant every Sunday morning. If you do not currently have our app, download it to your iPhone through the Apple Store or to your Android phone by going to Google Play and searching iCatholic Radio. The updated iCatholic Radio mobile app, your one stop for great Catholic programs and music.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. Robert George, robertpgeorge.com. In that last segment, talking a bit about the point of things take time, these injustices, these evils take time to really, rout them out of our institutions, the institution of our nation, right? And I think we can look back at the analogy of slavery here. This is always helpful to me to try to help put things in right perspective when we are living through this ongoing daily mass murder of the preborn, and understand that that this can, number one, come to an end. Right, there were folks that when slavery was baked in to our nation in every way, that they thought, well, this can never end. And look what's happened, that the abolitionists pressed on. Not only has it become illegal in law, but it's now unthinkable in culture. Nobody's arguing for slavery anymore. Abortion can go the same way. It can become illegal in law, unthinkable in culture. And I believe we have to get to that point if our nation is really to survive on the first of the first principles. We have to uphold this, or else something very terrible has happened to the soul of our nation, has happened to us. And this has already been taking place, as this, yes, has been going on for decades. But to me, it seems that there is a sense of urgency right now with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, that if we really pushed full force on this right now, there is a window that's open. That the court, these are people, there's a majority on the court, as you mentioned, constitutionalists on the court, folks that subscribe to originalism, and even though there's various interpretations of that, again, Hadley Arcus's new work on that is very helpful, but they ought to understand this, what we're talking about today. They still, though, didn't rule this way in Dobbs, going all the way and ascribing personhood, or even the scientific fact that life begins at conception, fertilization. They didn't even state that fact. in their ruling, sadly. And so I guess what I want to say is, when we look at the analogy of slavery, when we look at even the analogy of just saying if it was any other class of people that was being killed by the thousands every day, today and yesterday and tomorrow, would we have a greater sense of urgency? Would we be doing more? What kind of abolitionists would we be if we really saw this for what it really is? So I think there is a big degree of desensitization. So yes, I understand things take time, but at the same time, shouldn't we have that sense of urgency? And I remember, seeing a post that caught my eye when I was living in Rochester, New York, a few years back, and I saw that you had posted something with your friend Cornel West, taking a little trip over to Rochester, New York to visit the grave of the great Frederick Douglass. And why do we honor him so much? Because he was so resolute. He had that sense of urgency. Don't we need more of that? And for instance, just in a very practical way, the National March for Life, why shouldn't they have as the whole theme of the whole thing this year, as soon as possible, why shouldn't they have the theme personhood, right, for the preborn? Why shouldn't we be pushing for the end game right now and trying to show the Supreme Court that there is public sentiment for them to rule in that way? Dr. George, your thoughts?
Well, these great causes, as I say, do take time. Slavery, as you say, is the best example. The pro-life movement right now is feeling as though we've been put back on our heels. We won our great victory overturning Roe, but we weren't prepared for the backlash. And the backlash has resulted in the enactment of very, very bad, very unjust legislation in states around the country, California and Colorado and Illinois and so forth. We're losing referenda. We lost in Kansas. We lost recently in Ohio. But that should be no cause for despair. And I want to say why I think it should be no cause for despair. We need to redouble our efforts. We need to rededicate and recommit ourselves. But we shouldn't despair. We shouldn't think all is lost. Number one of the things that the great legal philosophers have all taught, all noticed, all called our attention to, is the way in which laws don't simply permit and prohibit things or facilitate certain things. Laws educate people. Laws help to shape public consciousness, public understanding, public opinion. And we had almost 50 years of law teaching people that the unborn child was nothing, was a mere a conglomeration of cells or mass of tissue, not a person, not even a human being. All false, of course. But this is what the law of Roe versus Wade taught people. And law is a great teacher. Now, it's going to take a while to unlearn those falsehoods, for the public to unlearn those falsehoods, to get refocused on the facts. And that means a great deal of our mission has to be focused on educating the public. We still have to work in the political sphere while we're doing that, and in the legal sphere. But an important dimension of what we do as part of an integrated process, including legal work, including political work, is the educational work. So we need to be out there doing what my co-author Chris Tollefson and I tried to do in the book you kindly mentioned, Embryo, A Defense of Human Life, laying out the scientific facts, rebutting the arguments, exposing the falsehoods that are baked into the pro-abortion ideology. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's important for people to understand that while we've been knocked back on our heels and we've suffered some losses since our victory in the Dobbs decision, in legislatures, in referenda, we are in much better shape as a movement today than the abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement was in the 1830s and 1840s and 1850s. We are much stronger. We have more public support than they did. And of course, it took a civil war, and we hope and pray and trust that it won't come to that with the pro-life issue. But the situation for the abolitionists was much more dire than in those days than it is for us today. So we need to build on the strengths we have through education, through public advocacy, through our legal work. We need to keep bringing cases. Jim, I don't think there will be one master case that solves the problem for us, or one masterpiece of legislation. I think it's going to be an incremental process, making progress where we can, always moving forward, not retreating. But as nice as it would be to get a great big moral equivalent of a Gettysburg battlefield victory, I don't think that's actually what's going to come in our case. I think we're going to have to go step by step, fight by fight in the legislatures, in the courts, to ultimately get to our objective. But we just need to stay steady. We need to not lose faith. We need to be dedicated, determined, willing to quote President Kennedy, pay any price, bear any burden. We need to be willing to make the sacrifices in order to achieve our objective. It can be done. I believe that it will be done. But it's going to take an awful lot of work and faith on the part of all of us who do understand, those of us who do understand the profound and inherent and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family, beginning with the precious child in the womb.
Very blessed, again, to have him here with us today. Dr. Robert George, thank you for being with us. God bless you all.